Hello and welcome to this reproduction video on inherited disorders, and this video will focus on the disorder polydactyly. Just to emphasise, inherited disorders are ones that are passed on from your parents, not to be confused with communicable diseases, which are spread from person to person and caused by a pathogen, or some of the non-communicable diseases that are due to an interaction of your genetic makeup as well as your lifestyle, such as cardiovascular disease, which was covered in an earlier part of the specification. So the condition polydactyly is characterised by having extra digits, so extra fingers and toes. The thing about polydactyly is it's caused by a dominant allele, which means that the allele needs to only be inherited from one parent for the recipient to actually have the condition. Because it's a dominant allele, we are going to depict the genotype of a person using a capital P for the allele that confers polydactyly, these extra digits, and a lowercase p for somebody who is unaffected. Now the issue obviously with using certain letters is that their capital and lowercase forms can look very similar. So when you're choosing a letter to represent the genotypes and the alleles of those genes in an exam question, it's important that you make those letters look as different as possible. So let's say you have a cross between a couple where there is an affected male and an unaffected female. We use different colours to represent whether the person is affected or unaffected, and different shapes to represent the genders. So if we took an affected male or an affected individual with an unaffected, whether or not they've got polydactyly is the parental phenotype. And the parental genotype could be either capital P for the affected male, or it could be capital P lowercase p. And I'm going to go through both versions of this cross, but first of all, let's go with a homozygous dominant genotype. For an individual to be unaffected here, both the lowercase p's should be inherited. Let's make that very clear that it looks different to the capital P. So we've got the parental genotypes here, and this could be duplicated onto this diagram. What would the outcome be of their children, or what is the likelihood that their children are going to inherit polydactyly and have extra digits? One way of working this probability out is to use something called a Punnett square, which is this thing here. The mother, for example, has the genotype lowercase p, and the father has the genotype capital P. The next bit here is the gametes. So you've got to remember that we are looking at sexual reproduction here, and with any form of sexual reproduction there is a fusion of gametes, and gametes are haploid, which essentially means that we have to split these two alleles up. The act of meiosis itself would mean that the gametes that are produced as a result of meiosis would only contain one copy rather than both copies of this allele. So in terms of splitting them up, the father would have a sperm that would have a capital P or a capital P, so there's no other alternatives there. And in the mother's eggs, it's just going to be lowercase p. And if this sperm was to fertilise this egg, the offspring will have this genotype, which is a heterozygous genotype. Again, if this sperm here was to fertilise this egg, the offspring would again be heterozygous. And again, we'll do this sperm fertilising this egg, and this sperm fertilising that egg. Okay. And a quick analysis will show that all the offspring, because polydactyly is caused by a dominant allele, which means that the allele only needs to be expressed once in the genotype for the condition to become the phenotype. So all of these actually have a capital letter in them. They have the dominant allele, and therefore the phenotype would be polydactyly. Or you could say that they are affected, and that is 100% affected. In terms of the offspring genotypes, they are all capital P, lowercase p, so 100% heterozygous. So how would this outcome look on what I'm drawing here, which is a pedigree diagram? These two parents have the potential to produce children whereby 100% of them are heterozygous. So So they have capital P and lowercase p. Let's say this couple only actually produced 3 children in total, one of which was a girl. So in this cross, all children, whether they are male or whether they are female, are affected, and they are heterozygous. So what about if this child grows up, meets somebody who wants to start a family with them, and let's say they are unaffected? We still have an affected male and an unaffected female. However, the affected male is now heterozygous rather than homozygous. Let's correct that here. So lowercase p instead. And as a result, the cross would look quite different. So if this sperm was to fertilise this egg, you would have a heterozygous offspring. If this sperm was to fertilise this egg, again you have a heterozygous offspring. Now if this sperm with the recessive allele was to fertilise an egg that's carrying the recessive allele, you have homozygous recessive, and this means that the person is relatively normal or unaffected. They don't have polydactyly, and again this sperm fertilises this egg, you have the same outcome. So we have 50% that have polydactyly and 50% that do not. So in terms of this outcome here, you say that 50% have polydactyly and 50% are heterozygous, while 50% are lowercase are homozygous recessive. So if both parents are homozygous for their allele, and one is affected and one is not, there will be a 100% chance that the offspring inherit the condition. If one parent is heterozygous for the condition and they meet somebody that is homozygous recessive and is unaffected, there is a 50% chance that their offspring could inherit that condition. So let's just show that here. So let's say the couple have 2 girls, half of them are likely to be unaffected and have this genotype, the other half will be affected and will be heterozygous for the condition. So there's one other outcome that we can look into, whereby 2 heterozygote parents who are both affected try to have those children. So both affected, both heterozygotes, what is the likelihood of their children inheriting the condition? So in terms of gametes, meiosis will mean that 50% of the male sperm will contain the capital, while the other 50% of the male sperm will contain the lowercase p. And in the female's eggs, 50% will have the dominant allele, while the other 50% will have the recessive allele. So in this cross, both parents are heterozygous, both have 50% of their gametes carrying the dominant allele, and the other 50% carrying the recessive allele. And the chances of this sperm and this egg meeting would mean that one offspring will be homozygous dominant. This sperm meeting this egg produces a heterozygous affected individual. This sperm and this egg, the lowercase p, capital P, again it's heterozygous, and then this sperm fertilizing this egg, there is a 1 in 4 chance of the individual being unaffected. So in terms of the offspring phenotypes, there are 3 affected to 1 unaffected. In terms of the genotypes, there is 1 times homozygous dominant, 1 times homozygous recessive, and 2 times heterozygous offspring. Remember, when you are tackling any question on polydactyly, that it is caused by a dominant allele, that you need to set it out so that you have parental phenotypes first, then parental genotypes. Very important, get the gametes right, and then you do a Punnett square, also known as a genetic diagram. And once you have completed that, you must analyse your findings and quote the offspring phenotypes and offspring genotypes. And the reason why I've included this diagram in here is that this is what we call a pedigree diagram, often depicted in family trees, for example, and unless you know what you're doing, they're quite difficult to analyse. So there will be a key to help you analyse the information, and you won't be given any of these letters or genotypes on that pedigree diagram, but it's advisable, just so that you've got your head around what's going on in the question, to actually write in those genotypes to guide you through the question itself. So all the best of luck with this, keep practicing with it, and don't forget all of these subheadings, they are so important. Do check in again soon.